Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Friedman in the studio, and my next guest to join me is Tiffany Kelley. Tiffany is the founder of Nightengale Apps. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here today.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And before we got on the air, you were telling me a little about your company. That sounds very fascinating. And
Yes.
why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your company, and then we'll talk a little bit about you.
Okay, great. Nightengale Apps, we're a healthcare technology company delivering mobile solutions to nurses working in hospital settings and healthcare organizations. Our first product, Know My Patient, is designed to support the nurse from the start of their shift through the end of the day in order to really create that link between the electronic health record that's in the hospitals today, but isn't necessarily able to give them that information on the go in their pockets.
Now, you have a lot of firsthand knowledge of the industry because
Yes.
you are a nurse by
Correct.
profession.
Right.
And so you've been on the clinical floor and
Yes.
treating patients, and you saw a need, a gap, if you
Mhm.
will.
I did. So yes, you're right. I am a nurse, and I've experienced what I saw firsthand, which was nurses relying on their scrap piece of paper, which is often called their brain or their report sheet, which I used as well, to collect the information they need to know about their patients over the course of the day. That starts in the first few minutes of their shift and lives in their pocket so they can reference it throughout the course of the day. And there's things on there like patients' allergies and when meds are due, and all of these things that you just kind of instinctively need to reference back to.
And some of that information is in the medical record, but
is.
again, it's not easily accessible
It's not
on the fly.
accessible on the fly. So we've created an app to be able to integrate with the hospital's record to pull that information out that's needed that could be visible, or push information in that would be better serviced through a smartphone rather than a large workstation on wheels, which is
Typically, the
what
way
they
the
have
information
today.
is accessed.
Right.
And the app is something that how do you deploy the app? Is it deployed through an institution, or is it
Right.
deployed through the individual?
Right. That's a question we get asked a lot because when you think of apps, you tend to think of them as consumer downloadables that you can go to the App Store and just download it. Given the nature of what this is, it's really an enterprise solution in the
Okay.
sense that we're looking at patient information and providing that resource to the hospital for their nursing end users.
Okay.
So the nurse would come in and pick up a smartphone, and right now we're on Apple devices, and be able to start their shift, look at the information that they need, have that shift report that they normally have, but instead not having to write feverishly down what they can capture, and be able to focus on the conversation and then move throughout their day and have access to the other aspects that they need to know.
And now, is the information, for lack of a better term, list-driven, so that it's easy input, or are they literally typing every aspect in?
Right. So good question. We've limited it to things that are really easy to enter and things that are on the fly. And based on what I saw as the need and the gap, right now you've got nurses writing on Post-it notes, sometimes their hand, gloves, tape on their pants, and that's to capture that essential vital data that's at the bedside that needs to get into the chart. But we try to be as efficient as possible.
Now, I would imagine one of the challenges in the profession is that it's a very dynamic environment. Patients are always coming and going.
Yes.
Information is always changing. And so a lot of the information, as you said, you have to acquire on the fly.
Right.
You come in for a shift, and
Yes.
it may be all new patients
Yeah,
in
exactly.
a given day, and you've got to come up to speed very quickly.
Exactly.
And as we talked about and a little bit, I think the nurses are sort of on the front lines of not only the patient care, but also sort of that customer service aspect
Oh, yes,
of making the
absolutely.
patient feel
Right.
special in some
Right.
respects, for lack of a
Yes.
better term, or cared
Right.
for. So there's a lot of elements of that I'm sure your application is helping to bridge and to capture.
Right. The reason we call it Know My Patient is because the first research project I did was to understand, what does this mean when nurses say, I know my patient? Because that's a phenomenon that happens, and you'll either know your patient or you won't. And I needed to understand what that meant, because historically it's been thought of as an expert level nursing practice, but my argument has been that if the quality indicators show that nurses that know their patients have better outcomes, then we need to be able to provide a tool so that every nurse can know their patient. And it's based off of clinical data as well as personal data. So for example, I have no idea if you drank coffee, but I would want to know going into your room in the morning if you have a preference for how, like, what time you wanted to be wakened for your vitals, or if you like coffee, or if you need your meds, you know, crushed up with applesauce. I took care of kids, so there were certain things that I had to do for them.
Tricks of the trade.
Right, but those things are essential so that you can build that bond with the patient and the family, and they feel like the nurses are communicating to one another.